So today we warmly welcome Taja Wicks. Taja grew up in Seattle and has spent the last 7 years on Burkus Island. 6 of those years stewarding and learning from the Bullock's Permaculture homestead. During that time, she took on many roles, including garden manager and nursery manager, as well as teaching workshops on many subjects that align with her passions. She is a seed keeper, educator, grower, garden coach, permaculture consultant, fermenter, amateur plant breeder, and biologist. Taja is passionate about seed saving, food preservation, greenhouse growing, and incorporating flowers into a productive vegetable garden. All of these passions have driven her interest in permaculture. So Taja will speak for about 40 minutes and then we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for the introduction from Jenny and from Laura, especially for making this happen and getting me here. I'm here to talk about permaculture, a word that we hear a lot. What does it mean? I would, throughout my presentation, if anyone has questions at the end of a slide before I go on, I would love to have questions so we can raise our hands and then we'll have some question time at the end. I would like to ask a question because I just want to gauge kind of where we're at. What is permaculture? Does anyone have a little? No wrong answers. It can be a lot of different things. I've probably said 20 different definitions or explanations for it and could at any time. Yeah.
I think of it as working with nature instead of against.
Love that. Very true. Yes.
Yeah. If somebody says something to the audience, can you repeat it through the mic?
I can. Yeah. Working with nature instead of against, which I like.
I've learned that permaculture is a design framework for incorporating nature and multi-functioning plants in your landscape.
Yes, permaculture is a design framework incorporating nature into your designs, which, yeah, I would agree with that. Anyone else have any? Okay, great. So I would agree. I would say that permaculture is a design system that has a set of ethics and principles that engages you and makes you think intentionally and holistically about what is around you. I have some definitions from the person who created or kind of coined the term permaculture, Bill Mollison. I also like to think of permaculture as a permanent culture and permanent agriculture. Many of our systems today aren't encompassing this ecosystem that we have. So permaculture is a way to engage with the natural ecosystems around us and inside of us and interpersonally around us. I'm just going to read one of these quotes, which is, permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals in all their functions rather than treating any area as a single product system. So it can get as technical or as less technical as we want. I think the biggest thing is that permaculture is not just one way to do things. When someone asks me, actually, for example, someone asked, do I like cover crops yesterday? I do like cover crops. They asked, do I turn them over? It depends. What is my situation? What is my goal? What is the outcome? What does the land need? What does the soil want? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked when you're thinking about design. Some pictures of Bill Mollison. Him and David Holmgren created the book Permaculture 1 and the Permaculture Designer's Manual, which I have on the table over here. Bill Mollison grew up in Australia, doing a lot of different work throughout his life in ranching. And he saw that the systems of the industrial world were not serving the people or the earth or the plants. They all had, money and corporations as the people who were leading and designing a lot of the systems. So he created a system of design that would help us connect back with nature. Bill Mollison was very, very interested whenever he traveled in learning from the indigenous peoples of the land. For instance, we are on what is called Orcas Island in this right now, in the Salish Sea. So we have a lot to learn from the Coast Salish people who took care of this land and all of these islands, many different tribes working together to make these islands the garden that they were. They took care of Gary oak savannas and did controlled burns. I love to hear that there's a presentation about that because that's very important. In a lot of ways, I would say that indigenous people were the original permaculturists. We're just using permaculture as a label to be able to speak to one another about many different ideas and many different things that you can design together. For instance, when they burned, it wasn't just about removing the small trees that are growing up in the fields so that the Gary oak and the camas and the other plants that are improved by fire exist. It was also because the ash falls in through the water table into the ocean and feeds not only the plants as it does that, but the oysters and the clams. And so there's always this cyclical relationship. And Bill Mollison was very interested in learning that from people wherever he went. And I think that that's really important. There's always people that we can learn from. Even people who don't know gardening may actually teach us more because they ask questions that we've forgot to continue asking, which I think is really important. This is a good example of permaculture as closed loop and regenerative systems. On the left here, we have industrial agriculture. Next to that, we have organic agriculture, which is better because it's using less chemicals, but it's still encompassing giant monoculture fields and using sprays that are considered organic and often are less harmful, but we're also not fully taking care of the soil ecosystem when we're doing big tilling and big monoculture crops, which I feel like in general, we're starting to learn about more and more, which is amazing. On the right side is a great example of an integrated system, one where everything is working together. The plants and the animals, the manure goes on to the plants after composting. There's less waste in our systems. We're thinking about the land and what is needed from it and what we need from it as well. And on the right side, we have industrial animal agriculture, which is, it's a bummer what we're doing to our animals. So it's important to consider all of the lives when you're designing, from very micro little bacteria and microbes in the soil, to the animals, to the pollinators, to us, to the next future generations. We are in control of what will be able to be accessible for the future. That makes me think that most Indigenous people are thinking 7 generations in advance. And I think we really need to get back to that kind of thinking. We need to be designing so that our great grandchildren are running around in beautiful gardens, not in, sad soil. And we can do that. I think it's really important to remember that we can make major changes in our lifetime. Regenerative agriculture picture there, but we can also just go to the Lum farm and go see what that looks like on kind of a medium small scale. We can also do it in our backyards. There's lots of people who have smaller, chickens and those kind of things, or ducks, and those are great for incorporating into systems. So it's a design system. What does that mean? Where does that start? There are core values that you're always coming back to. Those core values are earth care, people care, and fair share, which I've touched on a little bit. But what does that really mean, and what does that look like in practice? There is a lot of things to think about when you're designing any system. And I would like it to be known that permaculture is not just about agriculture or gardening. It is a design system that can be used to design the problems in society that we are seeing today that we're trying to get away from. Fair share could be considered the economy. It looks like meaningful work and barter and trade and sharing with what you have. What is your excess? What can you give? Earth care looks like many things, but preservation and species protection and environmental protection. And then there's overlapping in between, like the economic and the earth care is what is the positive impact that we're creating through that. We also have people care, which is a huge foundation, and we are a part of the earth. And we are also a part of needing a fair share of what is around us. Yeah, I think the intersection between people care and earth care being open spaces and access to actually being on the land, that is a really hard thing for people, especially of my generation. We might not have that land access. And same with many indigenous cultures who have had that taken away from us. So how can we share those things? How can we make sure that people are passionate about taking care of and stewarding the land, like everyone in this room has access to it and has the ability to share it in ways that work for them and the people around them. So that's in the middle. We got the care for earth, care for people, and fair share. And then on the outside, we have, and the first ones are the ethics, and then these are the principles. Well, I think there's 12 on this slide. I've seen up to 16 or 20 principles. It really permaculture has evolved with many different people working at it. You can now get a certificate from it at OSU. And there's a lot of different ways to be thinking about it. But these are kind of the core values that we check in with when we're designing. I'll just go over a couple of them that I feel like are important, especially considering gardening. Observing and interacting is the biggest thing I can say, especially if you're just beginning or if you've been around it a long time. What's blooming right now? How does that interact with what I'm planting in the soil? Does it just so happen that when the lilacs are blooming every year, I start to think about my beans and my cucurbits? And when the horse chestnuts are blooming, I start to put my beans in the ground. There's so many things that we can be looking at and interacting with that, you know, we might not consider if we aren't paying attention to what's surrounding us. Use and value renewable resources and services. What is already around us? Does your neighbor take care of horses and they have a huge pile of stable litter that you can turn into delicious compost for your garden next season? That's what I did. I just scooped that compost yesterday. It was delicious. And there's a lot more around us too. Like unfortunately, we're getting a lot of packages from far away. Oh no, but there's cardboard. We can use those for compost or for sheet mulching or for many aspects of things. So a big aspect of this is what is around me that is becoming waste? What can I do with that waste so that it is no longer waste and that is integrated into my systems? Clearly, I'm not going to be able to teach us all of what permaculture is today, but I'm hoping that this gives us an idea and some future excitement about researching more. because there's so much that goes into this, and it can really be used in every aspect of our lives. Like me and my partner just moved, and we're trying to figure out where certain things are going on the land. And we use a lot of these principles to design what is going to be best for us and the land around us. It is a framework. Why permaculture? We may have had some ideas from the last couple slides. I think I'm just going to go for the center here. A better tomorrow. By addressing the key issues of our time, a multitude of approaches, permaculture provides a framework for truly sustainable development. Yeah, there's many aspects that we could all look at too. And also, all of us here have different passions and different interests. And I need all of you with all of your different passions and interests to have an interest into being in right relationship with the people, the earth, and the fair share of what we have together. That is how we together can design systems that will take care of us and our future generations. We're gardeners, so I wanted to talk a little bit about flowers. And there's many different, I could go into almost every principle and relate it to flowers, but I'll just talk about a couple things that I've learned in my garden. The bottom left picture here and the middle picture is a dahlia. This dahlia had been overwintered in the ground for many seasons, which I really appreciated because that means I didn't have to dig it up every season. So I decided that I wanted to save seeds from it. And as I was observing it through the season, I noticed that it had a lot more pollinators than the really gaudy ones with really big frills. It was really hard for the pollinators to get into the pollen. So I was like, oh, that's amazing. They're sleeping on the dahlias in rainy days. It's just always buzzing with activity. So I saved those seeds and planted more. And dahlias are fun because they're like apples where you never really know what you're going to get, as they're very cross-pollinating. But since I had saved it from this really open flower, almost every flower I got had these big, beautiful open centers. And the pollinators were so happy that next season. And if I hadn't have spent that time just looking and being with the flowers, I don't think I would have noticed that or thought to save them or started looking at different dahlias that have open centers, or even my marigolds are also another one where the bees are always sleeping in them on those like cold August afternoons. I guess I would also say, yeah, with flowers, using edges is one of the permaculture principles, because when, for example, we're on a big open meadow and then the forest starts, we often see the most activity there, with little squirrels coming in and out, getting their snacks, birds coming into the trees, going and eating the seeds on the meadows, creating those edges in our gardens. Creating that diverse space brings a lot more biodiversity for us to engage with and look at. And flowers are always a really big part of that. On the edges of all my garden, I always have flowers to bring in the pollinators that I want, and also as pest control. Having the full system aspect of things, for example, brassicas, actually having some of your brassicas flower brings in pests that will help with the control, or sorry, I guess it brings in bugs that we like to help with the pest control. And that's really important. We've forgotten so many of our loops, our cycles, our systems. That's what permaculture is looking at those ecosystems and helping restore them. If every season, at the end of the season, we just till everything into the ground, we're not going to have what we need at the beginning of the season. Where I am now, we're surrounded by nettles. There are so many ladybugs this year. The aphids were eating the nettles pretty early on. So there was a food source for those ladybugs. So now I have more ladybugs to deal with the aphids that are probably going to come onto my brassicas. Everything is cyclical interactions. This is a classic permaculture example. If anyone's done some research, this is in Bill Mollison's permaculture book. This is just looking at a chicken. We could do this for a flower, we could do this for ourselves, we could do this for the river, we could do this for our mower, we could do it for anything. What is actually coming in, and what are the needs? What do we need to make this animal healthy? What is going to be a byproduct or a creation of this animal, which is up at the top there. And then there's some things that are intrinsic, like its breed, or, for us, there's just even things that we're specifically passionate about. Like, it doesn't make sense to design in a way that you can't reach down to the space to get it, or in a way where it just doesn't work for you. We do have intrinsic things that we need to be considering in our designs. I think this is just a fascinating way to look at this, because once we have this down, and then we do that for many of the different things in our garden, then we can start to relate things to one another and see how, oh, this chicken creates great fertilizer for me in my garden. And then at the end of the season, I let my chickens into the garden to eat the pests and the bugs, and everything has a relationship. Chickens are a great, easy example, but it's important to understand that everything has many different values and many different things that it will bring to the table because of that. Whoa. This is kind of a larger way to look, like, I just said the chicken, but now we have the chickens and the sheep and the farmer and the orchard, and how they're all working together. Let's just follow one. The pasture is food for the sheep. Oh, they forgot, but it's also food for the chickens and possible future vegetable garden. And pasture creates the good soil health for the orchard, which the orchard brings food and wood for the farmer. And the farmer is taking care of things like water and planting and food and shelter for the chickens, but then the chickens give feathers and eggs and pest control and tillage and fertilizer. You don't have to get this complicated, but it's kind of fun too as well. If you're having a day in the winter and you're like, how do these things interact? How do I want to make sure that they're interacting better with one another? How can I design it so that these things, for example, my vegetable garden, should I make sure that my vegetable garden is close enough to my chickens to be able to regularly be giving them the compost scraps? If I have them too far away, am I going to actually give them those vegetable scraps? These are the ways that we can design ways that work for us and for the land. This little picture up at the top is another kind of classic example of what is called a guild. So that's a tree and possibly a berry bush and many other species planted beneath. The idea here is that all of the plants are interacting with one another and with the soil. For instance, yarrow is often planted in vineyards because yarrow is really good at going deep into the soil and mining potassium and phosphorus, which is really important for good grape growth. So when we have these plants growing together, they are actually balancing the soil system better. And I have all these pictures of people because we are a really important part of the system, and I don't want us to forget. When we plant a tree for the future generations, not only are we planting joy for the pollinators and making sure that there's a windbreak and more habitat, we're also making it so children can climb trees and that we can harvest fruit together and that we can sit below in a garden and just look and enjoy and learn from what is around us and in front of us. And then there's always going to be a yield when we're planting like this. If I have tons of herbs below my trees, then not only is my garden productive for me, and not only is my orchard productive for me with apples, but this time of year I can go and harvest a ton of chive blossoms and make chive blossom vinegar, which is in the far right side of this picture. And I definitely don't take all the chive blossoms because the pollinators are loving it. There was a little native black bee, just the tiniest little thing, and he was sleeping in there just yesterday. Yeah, when we are planting and designing like this, we are also very much involved in taking care of the soil and understanding that that is its own living organisms and living ecosystem. Yeah, I would say that's a whole other rabbit hole that you can go down into soil health. But the biggest thing I can say is that incorporating organic matter and healthy compost is going to increase the biodiversity of your microbes, which is going to make it more possible for those microbes to help eat and consume what is growing up above to create and help your next plants with their nutrients. So why do we do this again? Because looking at the relationships can help us design cyclically and help us know that this world is abundance. We have so much around us, and I think in our culture now it's often looked as we don't have enough. We don't have enough topsoil. We don't have, enough food to go around. And those are true problems, but those are also design flaws of the system. And that's why permaculture is a design system. It is looking at how can we get out of these ways that we're not taking care of one another? How can we be sharing the excess abundance of apples on this island? Are we all pressing enough? Are we applesaucing? Are we shouldn't that just be a gift for all of our families that live off island? Like, we have so much and the earth gives us so much. It tends to give it all at the same time though, which that's hard. And that's why you need to plan and have some ideas around what is going to happen. Love the idea of just planting 50 trees, but what are you going to do to take care of those 50 trees? You have to prune them, you have to weed around them or create a guild that you can chop and drop around them. It's not simple. It takes planning. It takes working together. All of these 3 pictures are things that I did in community with people. We harvested a bunch of apples, we pressed it. This was last season. Oh gosh, what do we do? I ended up canning, we froze about 10 gallons of apple cider, and then I canned about 62 quarts of apple juice, which is great because one of my favorite things to do with apple juice is to preserve peaches. So I'm also thinking about next season, before I have apples falling off the trees, I can use the apple juice that I got last season to do peaches in apple juice. The middle one is from my seed class last year, where we got together and we saved seeds in community. Seeds are really important to the future adaptations of this island to combating climate change. When we have locally adapted seeds, they actually make relationships with the microbes that are in the air and the environment so that they have a better start off next year. And they're adapting to what we actually have versus where were those seeds that grown at Johnny's? We should be supporting local seed keepers and getting from as many local seed companies to give us that head start for those things that are already adapted here. And then again, preserving the abundance. Plums, that was with my class a couple years ago. I think that was just a portion of it. I think we did it like 36 jars of plums with a group of, I think there was 7 of us in an hour and a half. It was amazing what can be created and then what can be shared into the future. I actually still have a couple of those jars. I like to keep at least one from the seasons before to compare them to last. So permaculture is about designing in ways that we can create and share this abundance, about making relationships with things to help what is needed in the world. Some more cute drawings by Brenda Quinlan. Industrial agriculture versus permaculture, kind of the reverse going on, degrading land by tilling topsoil and using fertilizers that are created from the same thing that the nitrogen bomb is created for is the standard. We don't want that anymore. We want to take land and we want to help it. And we don't need to do that by purchasing a lot of things. That's an option. If you've got tons and tons of money, you can do a crazy permaculture design pretty fast. That's not always realistic. It is about starting small, starting where you actually can, so that it doesn't become overwhelming and you can create those little oases and then build from that. Like I always encourage people, if they don't have an herb garden close to their front door or kitchen, like that's a good place to start. If you have the right sun, you should be able to go walk out and harvest some rosemary and oregano for your sauce every couple days. Even if you don't have the time to be doing intensive gardening, there's a lot that we can plant, that we can be using and sharing, which I think is really important. Sharing community gardens, how, there's a crop swap, which I love. We have that today. I think a lot of you in the garden club are already probably participating in something that would be called a permaculture. This is not just, it has become kind of a buzzword. Sometimes people will be like, I do permaculture and this is the way you should do it, but they haven't been to your land or asked you like 25 questions. I don't think that they're doing permaculture design at that point, because every design, it depends. What's your soil like? What's your sunlight? What's your wind like? What's your capacity for taking care of this like? What are the resources that you already have? It's not just a one and done thing. It's something that is best done together. And that can be what you're already doing, coming together and talking about how you're taking care of your gardens. What is permaculture design? I found this on the internet and I just loved it, so I had to share. Oh, I see a question from Ken.
Yeah, a couple of slides ago, there was a line, say yield. And I just wanted to touch on that. I see, you asked at the beginning, what does permaculture mean to you? And for me, I think readjusting my, I guess, goal or desire for what I'm trying to accomplish. Like the number of broccoli heads that I harvest is kind of a goal, but it's not the only goal. The real goal is health, ongoing, increasing the health of my garden and myself and the surrounding community. So I guess I just want to say that for me, permaculture is about readjusting your priorities.
Yes.
It's not just about yield that I'm getting, and it's increasing health for everybody.
Permaculture is about readjusting your priorities. Ken just said that, having 10 broccoli heads would be nice, but the overall health of his garden is much more important. And perhaps after working on the overall health, you end up having 20 broccolis and then sharing those with people. But yeah, obtaining a yield is a principle of permaculture. I would say for me, it is important, but it's almost like a byproduct rather than a principle in my personal opinion, because if I'm creating that ecosystem that is healthy and thriving for the people, for the land, then I am probably obtaining some kind of yield. Yeah, I really like that. It is about adjusting your priorities. Integrating waste as a primary resource and closing the loop. That is one of the number one things. And this small little spot says gardening. So gardening is a huge aspect, but that's not the precipice of design. But however, gardening is a revolutionary act and is really important. We're out there, we're getting vitamin D, it's getting us outside, it's having us build soil and sequester carbon and learn about the bugs that are coming. It encourages trade and generosity. We'll go back to the broccoli. If you did have a great broccoli harvest, but you grew them all at the beginning of the season, maybe you don't want to freeze them and maybe you want to share them with your friends, or maybe you grow 150 tomatoes and you need to share those with the garden club. There's always abundance that's happening that can be shared. And gardening is a great way to start. And it's a great way, if you're already gardening, to realign with what you're doing. Is there things that I'm wasting every season? Do I just not like peas and I keep growing them? Stop growing them. You don't need them, you know? What actually works for you? Are you, is it really hard to get to the ground? Maybe have some raised beds. Do you actually consume a lot of fruit? That would be a reason to have 50 trees. If you don't, maybe you just need 5. Or maybe you want to focus more on berries because that's what you're more passionate about and that's what you're actually going to consume. So another aspect for me that's important is a term called appropriate technology. And that, technology doesn't have to mean tech. It can mean, for instance, a place that doesn't have electricity should probably not get a pump for their well that relies on electricity. You want to have a pump that you can manually pump. You want to design things that are actually appropriate for the uses of the people and the land. What can we do as gardeners? I could have had this whole conversation about what we can do as gardeners. I just tried to pick some things off the top of my head that I felt like we could do. Number one is observing relationships. So where are those relationships that are waste streams? Where are those relationships that we can be interacting better with? For instance, not using synthetic fertilizers or herbicides and encouraging pollinators for pest control, or using homemade fertilizers and companion plants instead of purchasing things in, or using chop and drop methods around your planting so that you're incorporating that organic matter back into the land. Or if maybe aesthetically you don't like how chop and drop looks, make sure you're using those materials to make compost so that they're staying in your land. Supporting local is also kind of a more broad thing, but that is really important too, so that we're keeping that fair share in our community. Anything that you're wanting help with, there's probably somebody in the community with education around that and with a big passion and interest in it. Thank you for having me here today to talk about this. That is really helpful for me and for getting to engage with people who have similar passions. Supporting our local nurseries and our farmers so that they can stay afloat. It's not easy to do all of this really hard work in a system that doesn't always particularly value that. When we have all of our farms across the country and nurseries subsidized so that they can be really cheap, I would much rather spend $3 for a tomato than $6, but not if $6 gives that $3 to my community members. That's really important because I'm going to need them. as this climate is changing, as this world is changing, we are going to need each other, and we are going to need to be building relationships with one another. Here's some photos from my garden over the years. These are all from when I lived at the Bullocks. And there's many things I could talk about in here, but I'd like to mention the hoop house. I think hoop houses are really important in our climate, especially for year-round food production. For me, winter is salad season, which sounds a little crazy, but I have most of my salad in the off season because after I'm harvesting, kind of the end, actually, I'm still harvesting tomatoes until September, but in around August, I can plant below my tomatoes the greens that I'm going to need for the winter. And because I often do very diverse plantings, I'm able to eat things even when the winters get really hard. I think it was about 3 winters ago where kale was dying for a lot of people around the garden. I had enough diversity of kale and perennial kales outside that I still had ones that survived, but we even had a lot that died at the Bullocks. But that year I had planted over 16 varieties of greens in my hoop house. So I came that day after the really hard freeze and things were looking sad, but I still had about 1/3 of the greenhouse that was edible food for weeks when people weren't having access to that. Another thing to consider is the microclimates that we all have. Every piece of property is so diverse and different, so planning for that. And then also planning for the microclimates within your microclimates. The Bullocks was an amazing place to grow. We had the marsh in front of us projecting the heat and the rock behind us holding in. So it's a lot easier to grow things than many other places on the island. And even with that, I had this hoop house with the sun shining on it all day that created another microclimate in front of it where it was extra hot and beautiful in where all these marigolds are. I originally found that soil dried out really fast because of that extra heat, but the weeds grew really fast too, which meant that all of my annuals would grow really fast. Out of that bed, I was able to do a huge harvest of shallots. And then once the shallots were harvested in, I believe it was like beginning of July, I planted radishes with all of those marigolds still being there. So there's, the more that you pay attention, the more potential that there is. The photo on the bottom and the far right were both harvested in late February, which I feel like we need to pay attention more to the shoulder seasons that we have on the island and to crops that, if you really don't like parsnips, don't grow them. They do take up a good amount of space, but wow, I did a varietal trial of parsnips where I had 7 different kinds of parsnips, and they were in the ground and ready for me to harvest all winter. And it was really nice to be able to have that starch resource. Same with rutabagas, leeks, carrots, those kinds of things. Experimentation. What can you get away with on either sides of things? I mentioned this to some folks last night, but a couple years ago, I was kind of itching. It was December, middle of December. I wanted to plant some seeds. It's not really time to plant any seeds. I had my hoop house. It was actually the year that most of the stuff, 2/3 of the stuff had died. So I was like, and I decided to plant some carrots and potatoes because I had some potatoes that were starting to sprout and I had some carrot seed. And I didn't know what was going to come of it, but by the time I needed to plant my tomatoes, I had a harvest of pretty decent size. They were still baby carrots, but enough to do some delicious stuff, as well as a potato harvest. Like, just because we should plant it at this point, following just a date on a calendar doesn't make sense in a changing climate. And we also need to be experimenting with ways to produce more fruit food throughout many different seasons. If I can have a little bit more of this and that, then it takes less strain off of my dependence of the mainland. And the top picture, I encourage people to grow in community. This was a group of me and my partner and two friends, and I think we spent maybe 5 hours. All, you know, four of us, so 20 hours to grow all of this squash. You know, we prepped the site together, we put in a watering system. You do have to check on the watering system. And then we weeded it a couple times and we were able to create winter squash for all four of us for all season. So anytime you do have the opportunity to work together, sometimes helping each other out actually gives you more time and space. If we wait for the government, it will be too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little. If we act as communities, it might be just enough. This is a quote by Rob Hopkins, and I really enjoy it. It's, you know, maybe a little pessimistic at the beginning, but it is a reminder that the reason that we have the diversity that we have today is because of people working together in gardens. Like all of the diversity we see in our supermarkets is generations of our ancestors working together and picking their favorites. That is really important. And my favorite tomato isn't going to be your favorite tomato, but I want to make sure that I grow something that makes you really excited to eat too. Involving one another, we learn so much about the systems that we are engaged with. The reason I like educating and having classes is I do feel it's the best way to continue my own education because of the questions that people ask. It is just, it's, everyone looks at things from such different perspectives, and it's really important to create those into our designs. Simple changes are really profound, like growing food. I really love Brenna Quinlan's illustrations. They do a really good job of kind of reminding us how many things there is in something as, you know, seemingly simple as growing food. I wouldn't say it's simple. So this is my last slide. This is the suggested book, suggested books that I have. Practical Permaculture was written by somebody who lived on the Bullock's land for about 7 years. And I do really think it is one of the best books to like really simply go through all the aspects of design. I have just talked about like theory of some aspects of permaculture that can help you guide you into whatever directions you're most interested and most needed next. If you're like really like, maybe you're an engineer or someone who like really likes to like know the hyper details of something, maybe you want to look at the Permaculture Designer's Manual or Intro to Permaculture because you want to have more of that like academic style education. One Straw Revolution is a book that inspired Bill Mollison. Oh, I'm always going to say his name wrong. Fukuoka was a farmer in Japan who was known for not do nothing. Yeah, that was kind of what he was known for. And he wouldn't fill his rice paddies with water. He might do, well, you know, that's a regular thing to do for a long period of time. He might do it for a day or two to suppress weeds, but he would be interplanting underneath his rice, his barley, a couple weeks before harvest. And then he would be leaving the rice straw down, and same on the other side. Before his barley was coming down, he would put rice. And so he was creating a system where everything was working with him. He was a lover of grass because he was like, well, what a wonderful mulch. I can just chop and drop and put that right there, and it's feeding what is needed to my plants. I also have some things that aren't particularly permaculture, but are directions that we can go into, like Mycelium Running is a wonderful book to teach you more about mushrooms and the relationships underground, which is often what we're fostering when we're creating gardens and especially orchards. The Art of Fermentation. Sandor Katz also has some simpler fermentation books that may be a bit more accessible, but I love The Art of Fermentation because it reminds us that we had cultures little like pickle cultures that we've lost. All of our family had, you know, you go back 150 years, everyone was fermenting things and they had cultures that were really specific to their families. You know, grandma's pickle doesn't taste like grandma's pickle over there, you know? And that's really important because when I think about permaculture, I'm not just looking at the macrocosm. I also want to look at the microcosm of, for instance, my gut. That has very similar relationships to the soil system and to the rhizosphere, which is the soil sphere, and oh the microbial sphere that is in the leaves, which has its own name. But these are all cycles that we can kind of compare, and looking at patterns is a really important part of permaculture. If you haven't read any of Carol Deppy's books, she's just wonderful and has taught me so much about seed saving and seed breeding. Braiding Sweetgrass is a beautiful classic that really connects us in with the land. And then Saanich Ethnobotany by Nancy J. Turner, or actually any of Nancy J. Turner's books, because she was an ethnobotanist that was very interested in our bioregion. Most of her books are from British Columbia, but you know, they're just right across the pond. We're more north than Victoria right now. So learning about these native plants and how things still are taken care of is really important because we can help steward those plants into the future. I would love if anyone had questions about anything I've talked about. Your hand and then you.
From a permaculture standpoint, how do you feel about no dig or dig gardening? Do you have any opinion?
From a permaculture perspective, how do I feel about no dig? It depends on the situation. Do you have a really bad bindweed infestation? I don't know if it's the best idea for you to just be mulching with wood chips. That's not going to help your situation. I think that sandier soils often take no dig better because they already have that aeration and you're building that organic matter on top of it. Whereas if you have really wet soil that's inundated with water, it might not make sense for you to do no dig, at least at the beginning, until you've actually built up layers of that soil structure, because microbes, most of our favorite microbes are aerobic, so they prefer when there's air and healthy soil structure. I think that mass tillage, like we're doing with giant tractors going 6 feet down, that is catastrophic to the soil structure, combined with fertilizers that are also killing the microbes. But if I'm just using my hand trowel or my hand hoe and I'm only going this deep into my soil, there should still be healthy activity underneath of that. I think everything is very situational. And I think that what happens a lot in, gosh, anything, gardening, cooking, whatever, is people get very attached to one idea, like no-till, which has great uses and is not always the best use. Yeah. You had a question?
My question is, you mentioned, first time gardener, by the way, you mentioned planting a seed underneath your tomatoes, or there was something you were planting.
Yeah.
Could you just, like, kind of clarify, do you physically mean putting a seed underneath the actual tomato plant?
Oh, yes. Planting seeds underneath tomatoes. I'm not going in under the roots of the tomato and planting it right there, but kind of by the end of the season, I've usually pruned up most of my bottom leaves because they're not looking as healthy. And there's actually a fair amount of space on the ground. So I would be interplanting around those tomatoes, which, since there's only, a stem like this left at the bottom, and since it's August in a hot hoop house, like, I am enjoying the shade that the rest of the tomatoes are creating. So planting, interplanting, not directly underneath, but you can do that with all sorts of things. Like once, I I guess for instance, right now, if we've let our brassicas overwintered, many of them are probably going to flower. And you can let them go to flower for pollinators and to save seeds. But you could also, again, kind of prune up those bottom leaves and maybe support them a little bit because they tend to be falling over this time of season. And you can be planting things directly underneath of there. For instance, potatoes or greens that are going to be excited about having that shade, but also knowing that those kale plants aren't going to stay like that forever, which is why you could, encourage potatoes there or something. So kind of interplanting and companion planting is kind of the idea there. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I live on a property where, I feel mostly a steward because of the plant life that's already there.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put up a deer fence. So deer and vegetables. I just, because I do not want to harm this land.
Yeah.
At all, so I'd have to do vegetables close to the house. And I'll be damned if I'm gonna put up the fence.
Yeah.
So any recommendations?
So being on land where you're wanting to take care of the native environment, including the deers, which means not putting up a fence and still wanting to eat vegetables. That is hard. The deer are going to like to eat a lot of things. Yeah, I would say maybe so every land has different priorities. It sounds like it's very important for you and your priorities of your land to keep it in the natural system that it is. Do you have another friend who already has a big fenced in area that they're not using? Are there other community members that, are already have fenced in areas that they're growing and they need a hand? Maybe that's what's best for you. I know a lot of people will plant things kind of on their porch in pots for that situation, but the deer may still come up and eat it. That's very likely, and especially, Lily's like, they're gonna eat it. And
I like the idea of working with other people.
yeah.
Some bullet says here in this island, any plant, no plant is deer proof.
Yeah.
They eat theirs.
Yeah, Sam Bullock says that every plant is not deer proof here, even the ones with the little tag. And that's super true. And that's also true if we think about the whole aspect and ecosystem. The deer, in my 7 years here, when I first got here, were extremely overpopulated and eating everything, even the euphorbia, which should be toxic and burning their lips. When they died out, we saw that the salal stands and things came back. I think that that's more of a systematic problem where perhaps we should be hunting some of the deer. I'll go to you in the back and then you'll.
Well, we live on the rock, right? Burgess. High up.
Yeah.
A lot of rock. So my question is one, answer this. How do I build the soil up?
Yeah.
And where do I get that here on the island? I've had some come in, it's real sandy. I don't feel like it's building up really nicely, so suggestions on how to take what little layer I have build up to take up.
Yeah, that's a great question. So living on the rock up on one of the high spots, and I don't have much soil, how do I create that? What I would say is when you're in that situation, you should kind of consider yourself as container gardening, but in the rock. There's going to be crevices that are already deeper where the roots of, gosh, maybe it's a rose, maybe it's a dock are already going really deep. That's a sign to me, I'm looking at the plants around, that's an area where soil is able to be mined by the biology that's already there. So I would kind of observe and look at those spots, and then I would focus on building up in those spots. As far as where to get soil, Unfortunately, I feel like most of the soil that I've seen brought into places is not ideal. People are not getting rid of their delicious compost. Lopez Midnight Farm is getting rid of or selling their delicious compost, and the Lum sometimes does, but they have a big list. But it's your job to create and build compost and soil. What I would probably do is recognize that it's not going to be the best container garden for the first couple years. That's something that you're slowly working on and improving. That's a situation where I would be doing cover crops every season. And then when they're about this tall, I would be turning them under and planting into there, because we're just trying to build up organic matter. That's another thing where with your friends with horses or alpacas or cows, building compost, bringing in manure is, I think, one of the best ways you can be building that up. Yeah, and then question here.
So question, looking at my garden, how everything interacts. The slugs, these slugs, I look at them as they're chomping on my plant. It's like trying to figure out what purpose they have. And I know they're edible, they're food for the snakes, because I've seen my snake eat
Yeah.
a giant slug.
Yeah.
So is
Slugs.
yeah.
What are we gonna do about the slugs? Yeah, that can be hard. The first thing that came to mind was like kind of a quote that Bill Mollison used to say, which is, you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency, which I like, but that's not always realistic for everybody to get ducks, It also makes me think of an observation that me and my partner had this week, where my dog who really likes digging, but he has to dig in specific spots because I can't have holes everywhere. So he started digging in a spot that was just close to us and on the terrace, and that's not a spot I wanted to start because he goes back to the same spots. And so I cut some of the nettles that were around us and I put nettle in there so that the next time he went, he would like poke his nose and be like, oh, that's not a good spot. Little mean, but I can't have him digging big holes like that. And 3 days later, I went back to move those nettles and there was 35 slugs under a little pile of nettles like this. So me and my partner have collected nettles and put them in various spots of the garden. And we'll be using that as a slug trap. I think you do have to be a little bit comfortable with killing things sometimes. I think that the reason, though, is because we don't have that full ecosystem. There isn't enough for them to be eating. And also they have really good homing instincts. They say that slugs can move 10 to possibly 30 feet a day, but they're usually going back to their home spot. So you may be wanting to, unfortunately kill the whole family that's in that area. Another thing that I will say, which is something that I'm just starting to get interested in learn, is Brix levels. So we may have heard that for wine and things. And so that's looking at the sugar content of whatever you're looking at. It's also looking at the mineral content. So when we have high sugar content, we also have high mineral contents. And things that have really high Brix levels are things that are in really healthy, organically rich soils where they have those relationships with the microbes. And there is now research that things that have 12 to 16 Brix are not getting eaten by things as much, because the job, like, you have to consider, what is the job of the slug? The slug is wanting to eat decomposing and dying material. Unfortunately, sometimes our plants are not the strongest. They're not able to be creating those beneficial relationships with the microbes because they were stunted or whatever. And so working on the overall soil health should also help rebalance that ecosystem. Yeah.
And the other thing I thought of as I was doing was chop and drop
Mhm.
burners, hitting the slugs, and theoretically that would add some nitrogen to the soil, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's adding minerals and other nitrogen and giving something for the slugs to eat, which actually is a great point. I saw Ken and then your hand. So
It's about slugs.
we'll go slugs first.
Well,
More slugs.
I found these very interesting looking slugs in my garden. I started investigating, with seek and all that, finding out what they were, and they were leopard slugs.
Oh, great point.
And there were a lot of them around, and I read too that they often cannibalize the bad slugs.
Yes.
And that they really go after decomposing material. They're fascinating creatures. Their life cycle and mating thing is something to watch.
So true.
They wrote a thing on it, and I couldn't even believe.
Yeah.
Witnessed that myself, but
Yeah.
slugs, I think.
Yeah.
Indigenous here.
Yeah, leopard slugs are indigenous. I never would ever kill a leopard slug. They are also carnivorous.
After I flung them in the field, I started thinking about it, and I came back and found more, and maybe that's a blessing to have those there.
I would say it is a blessing to have leopard slugs. That is something that you should be working with. And knowing what you're killing too. That doesn't, and there's, native snails, the ones with the yellow shell. I found that they don't do as much damage to garden vegetables. I don't know if anyone else has found that true. We love leopard slugs, and their mating is crazy cool. Ken, and then our friend here.
Wanted to respond to the slugs, and that I think again, readjusting our attitude towards the slugs. It grosses me out when there's a slug in my lettuce, right? I don't want to eat slugs, so I don't think. Maybe it's actually good for you. A little bit on their faces. Well, too folks. Stand by that station. If we look at slugs as predators of our plants, it's like the wolves in Yellowstone. The whole system has predators in it. There's a reason for those slugs. I don't know what the reason is in your garden for that slug. In my garden, I go out, and I had a friend who goes out every morning and kills slugs. And she's a Buddhist. This sounds contradictory, but she takes a little stick, takes it through the slug and flicks it into the woods and says, "Back on the wheel." And I thought, well, that's contradictory to your values. And I was like, how do we not do that? When a Buddhist is flicking slugs out into the woods, there's something wrong. It's not healthy, it's not working with her values. So I'm looking at the slugs, and I just relaxed and said, some holes in leaves. Oh, what? I'm not eating that leaf anything. It's like I just let the slugs have it, yes. I probably reduce the habitat. What I found is that the slugs were where there was a place for the slugs. That's
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to repeat all of that, but perchance there is opportunity and integration for slugs. And then also that just makes me think that we don't have a full ecosystem in place where they can be surviving on the edges and those kind of things, because that's what I'll say. And then we have a question here.
Slugs love beer.
Slugs love beer.
Yeah.
Like the chicken, if you're trying to get rid of the slugs, and you put out a little bit of beer, they'll literally drown themselves in the beer.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to trap slugs, like in beer. You also have to be careful considering who else is around in those situations. Are there kids that are going to grab it? Are there cats that are going to drink it? My dog would chug that beer, no doubt. And I don't think I want that. But in situations where there aren't those things, maybe that is a really good, appropriate way to trap. Because gathering them together and then bringing them outside of our garden into places where they can survive. And then also considering that some of these slugs are a bit more invasive than others, like the leopard slugs we love, but those big fatty ones with the orange bottom that I don't know if you've ever gathered 6 of them in your hand, but your hand starts to go numb. They're not my favorite. I don't want them in there, but there is solutions, and maybe they're not always a problem. If there is just one hole in my lettuce versus them decimating my whole lettuce patch, I would say that that's a win. I would say that I've created an ecosystem there where they can have a little bit and I can have a bounty.
I think we should
Great.
probably wrap.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me and for
I really loved your constant theme of community. It's something for us to really think about and go back to your gardens and observe. Yeah, that's great. Thank you
Thank you.
so much, Tasha.
And I brought books that are some of my favorites if anyone wants to talk about it.